You know, the device you're watching this on right now, it's not just a screen. Inside, there's a microscopic universe, a world of tiny cities built on silicon that power literally everything around us. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the greatest technological stories ever told, the Great Shrinkage. Let's dive in.
It really all boils down to this one question. I mean, think about it. Your smartphone has way more computing power than all of NASA had when they first put a man on the moon. So how is that even possible? How did we manage to shrink a brain the size of a building into something that fits in the palm of your hand? Well, the answer is a wild story of genius, physics, and a prediction that changed the world. Okay, so to really get how far we've come, we've got to rewind the clock way back. Because the scale of this transformation, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. So let's start at the beginning with a 30-ton monster. Say hello to ENIAC. This was one of the very first electronic computers. And yeah, this thing was a beast. We're talking 30 tons, filling a massive room and sucking up enough electricity to dim the lights of a small town. And the reason it was so enormous? Its brain was made of thousands and thousands of these fragile, glowing glass bulbs called vacuum tubes. And right there, that's the core of the problem. Vacuum tubes were huge, they were power-hungry, they burned out all the time, and they were ridiculously expensive. Building a personal computer was pure science fiction, let alone a phone. The first huge leap forward came with the invention of the transistor, a tiny, solid-state replacement that solved every single one of these problems in one fell swoop. Now, the transistor was an absolute game-changer for sure, but hold on, that was just the first step. To get from a clunky transistor radio to the phone in your pocket, we needed a few more breakthroughs, one right after another that led to the real miracle of modern electronics. I mean, just look at how fast things started moving. It took over 40 years to get from the vacuum tube to the transistor. But then, boom, the pace just explodes. Only 11 years later, we have the first integrated circuit, and just 3 years after that, it's out on the market. This was the starting gun for the entire digital revolution. And this is where the real genius kicks in. The truly big idea wasn't just making a smaller transistor. The mind-blowing breakthrough of the integrated circuit, or IC, was figuring out how to build the entire circuit, the transistors, the connections, the whole shebang, from a single monolithic piece of silicon. The painful work of wiring everything together by hand was suddenly gone, replaced by printing it all at once. And you know, this new ability to print circuits, it led to an observation that was so powerful, it stopped being a prediction and literally became the blueprint for the future of the tech industry for the next 50 years. So, back in 1965, this guy Gordon Moore, who by the way would go on to co-found Intel, he noticed something incredible. He saw that engineers were consistently figuring out how to cram more and more transistors onto a chip. And he basically said, hey, it looks like we're doubling the number of these things every 18 months or so, and it's happening exponentially. Now, here's the thing you gotta understand. Moore's law isn't a law of nature like gravity. It was an observation that the whole industry looked at and said, okay, that's the target. It became a dare. Every company knew that if they didn't figure out how to double their transistor density every year and a half, their competition would, and they'd be left in the dust. And the result is right here on this chart. It's just staggering. In 1970, Intel's first chip had about 2,300 transistors. Pretty cool. By the year 2000, the Pentium 4 had 42 million. Whoa. But today, a modern CPU can have over 50 billion transistors. The numbers get so big, they're almost meaningless. That exponential curve just became a vertical wall of progress. The scale we're operating on today, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. Globally, humanity produces over a quintillion transistors every single second. That's a 1 with 18 zeros after it. We make more transistors every year than all the grains of sand on all the world's beaches. So, how on earth do you do that? How do you make something that small in quantities that large? Well, the answer is a process that's kind of like printing, but, on a scale that is just mind-bogglingly small. It's called photolithography, and it's probably one of the most precise and complex manufacturing processes humans have ever invented. So the secret ingredient here is something called a photomask. And really the best way to think about it is like a stencil, a really, really advanced, super precise stencil. It's a plate that has the microscopic pattern for just one layer of the chip etched into it. To build a modern chip, you need a whole library of these things, one for each layer. Okay, so here's the basic recipe. First, you start with an ultra-pure, perfectly flat disk of silicon called a wafer. Then you add a new layer of material on top. Next, you coat that with a special light-sensitive chemical. Then comes the magic part. You shine incredibly focused ultraviolet light through your photomask, your stencil. Everywhere the light hits, the chemical hardens. You wash away all the soft parts, etch away the material that was underneath, and bam! You're left with a perfect pattern. And the craziest part? You do this over and over and over again, hundreds of times, to build this complex 3D circuit one microscopic layer at a time.
All right, so we've got the basic printing method down. Now let's zoom out and see how all this comes together to build up an entire chip, taking it from a simple blueprint to the complex brain that powers our entire digital world.
It all kicks off with the design, the IC layout, and honestly, don't think of it like a simple circuit diagram. The best way to picture this is like a map for a vast, sprawling, microscopic city with billions of individual buildings and roads. Those are the transistors and wires.
And here's what makes this all affordable. You don't just print one of these cities. No way. Using that photolithography process, you print that same exact map hundreds of times, side by side, all over the surface of a single silicon wafer. It's mass production on an unbelievable scale. Once all those hundreds of layers are printed, the whole wafer gets sliced and diced with incredible precision, separating each of those little cities into an individual chip. At this point, it's called a die, and it is an unbelievably fragile, naked piece of silicon.
And that brings us to the last and super important step, the packaging. You know that little black rectangle you think of as a chip? Well, that's really just its protective case. It's the armor that keeps the super delicate silicon die inside safe from, the real world. And just as important, it provides all those little metal pins that act as the gates, letting our microscopic city talk to the outside world.
So there you have it. From a 30-ton machine that filled a room to a city with 50 billion transistors that fits on your fingernail, it has been an absolutely incredible journey. But that journey is reaching a turning point. Moore's law is slowing down, because we're bumping up against the absolute physical limits of silicon. We're literally getting down to the size of atoms. So the big question for the next generation of engineers is, what comes next? What's going to be the next tiny miracle that fuels another 50 years of progress? Thanks for joining me for this explainer.